Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. I want to welcome to the show gubernatorial candidate for the Democratic Party, Esther Charlestin. She is from the Middlebury area, chairs the Vermont Commission on Women, is a former member of the Middlebury Select Board, as well as an educator and teacher. She used to work in Middlebury school system as well, and also is the owner and operator, and I suspect chief bottle washer of consulting firm Conversation Compass. And as of August 13th, our winner of our Democratic primary in Vermont. So welcome, Esther.
Honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's quite a rundown of all the things you have been involved in. I have to say, it's a really interesting background. And I'm curious, I'm always wonder how people, when they look at their previous work experience and life experience, and they're considering elected office, like what part of your life experience do you think has really prepared you to serve as governor if you should win in November?
Yes, I would say working with students, teachers, my experience in higher education, spent 10 years there, and I loved all that I did, navigating the hard stuff, coming up with solutions, working in crisis, but also planning ahead for the future and for what is to come. And I have two beautiful children who have inspired me to really be a part of the shift and the change that we want to see. And in thinking about the future of Vermont, I said, I want to be engaged. And so I decided to go for it.
And of all the ways to serve your community, you served on the select board. People can also volunteer at the local library. I mean, there's so many ways to serve your community. What is it about elected office and governor specifically that called to you?
As I think about what we're missing in our state, there's so many gaps, and our current leadership has a leadership model of veto, not working with our legislators. And as I see the gaps, and it feels like a kind of a blame culture, I wanted to be that shift and making sure that, okay, what does Vermont need? Vermont needs a leader that's a visionary, that sees something different and is willing to work with our legislators to make it happen and create the Vermont that everybody can thrive.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about gaps, and Emily, our regular contributor, who is one of three reps in Brattleboro, unfortunately couldn't make it today. But that is something we talk about a lot, are like the gaps in the system and what we need to do to actually shift things and fill those gaps. So kind of a two-part question, I guess, what are some of the immediate gaps that you're seeing in Vermont?
Preparing our communities as climate change is real and is here, and there's no avoiding it. And so making sure that we have climate resilient communities, attainable housing for all. So making sure that making sure we have a better housing stock, but also the affordable housing for folks who can't afford $3,000 in rent, as it's going up, all the way up. And so how do we support folks to stay and live here? And then thinking about our education system and the way we fund it is not sustainable. And so how do we work together to create a way to make sure that property owners are not feeling that burden?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I realize I asked this question of someone who, if you are elected and become governor, you will be one person. in a larger system. And so the magic wand won't be yours to wave alone. But I am curious, when you look at these issues and as you said, kind of shifting the system, are there specific places or specific levers that you would like to pull that you think would shift things for the better?
Mhm. I think beginning with having a relationship with our legislators, I
That does seem kind of basic.
yeah, no, honestly, it's so important. And working collaboratively, I think changing the culture completely in that sense would be my first thought. Like, how do we work together to make sure we can do the work that we need to make Vermont a better place? I think that is a huge piece. Another piece I think about is in our education system, appointing another Secretary of State. Secretary of Education, not
Okay.
Secretary of State. Oh my gosh, I
I
love
was
Sarah.
I was
And
wondering where you would go with that. That was
I
interesting.
love Sarah Copeland. Hanses, she's amazing. She's so supportive. But what I meant was a Secretary of Education, and work again back to working with legislators, like really respecting, okay, if there's a no, why is there a no? Well, um, is where I would start, is where I would start.
Thank you. You know, one of the things I was noticing on your website, your campaign website, and probably listeners are so tired of hearing me say that, is sometimes I think we all use language that everyone nods and's like, yeah, yeah, totally agree. And yet, how we define some things or how we believe to bring them about are not necessarily the same thing. And a couple of things that stood out for me in your website was livability was one of them. And I think for me that kind of hooks into like affordability and how do people thrive in Vermont. And I think that is one of the things that a lot of us would agree on, but not necessarily see the same path forward. So when you talk about people thriving and livability, how do you define that? And what would that look like in someone's daily life for you?
Yeah, I would bring it back to being able to afford their bills and making sure that people have the support that they need as far as rent, utilities, taxes, figuring out other avenues to help folks, making it more affordable. How do we partner? I think about Champlain Housing Trust. How do we make folks who are renters become owners, but people who are in their house staying in their house? I think about elderly who are on fixed income and don't have other ways to make more money, making sure that they can stay where they are. So from people with new families to people who are aging, how do we make it so that everybody can be okay and have their basic needs met, such as housing, food, and clothes. And then I also think about polluters. I think about making sure that they pay up so that we can create this climate resilient community that we dream of, so that folks, the flooding that's happened, especially over the last 2 years, won't have as bad of an impact as it has over the different communities such as Barry. And so that's what I see so far. Oh, I cannot forget childcare.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes, childcare. So in thinking about childcare, making sure that folks are able to afford um, the daycare bill, especially if you have multiple children, but
Mhm.
supporting them in that.
There was, again, going back to your campaign website, this intrigued me, and I'd love if you would outline it a little bit more. And I'm paraphrasing, so if I don't get it correct, please correct me.
Yeah.
When you mentioned polluters and building a more climate resilient community, you had mentioned on your website an example using Superfund.
Hmm.
Could you talk a little bit more about that? That was interesting.
Yeah, so the Climate Superfund Act has passed, so that's really good. And what it does is it empowers our Attorney General, Charity Clark, to really go after those who have really, there's evidence to say that they contributed to a lot of our climate change. And so going after them to make sure that we get the money we need and deserve.
And then using that money for other climate resilient actions.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Um, what, one thing I think is tough when someone is running a campaign, especially as someone who is new, it's all like incumbents always have the upper hand, I think, in campaigns. What what is it that you want people to know about you and the way you approach issues and the way you approach conflict that can help them understand like who you would be as a governor?
Yeah. Well, in the work that I do, I facilitate currently hard conversations. So bringing people together to talk about the hard stuff and come to a happy medium is my style. Again, a collaborative leader. So bringing different folks to the table and making space to hear the hard things or things that we may not agree on to move forward is my style and is the way I will choose to lead and the way I lead now.
Mm-hmm. And that's right. Your consulting firm, if I remember correctly, um, you work with individuals and organizations to develop strategic plans um, around diverse to create more diverse cultures using diversity, equity, and inclusion principles, I believe.
One of the things that I do, and
Okay.
I also help with facilitation. So facilitating board retreats, really helping organizations work through a hard time.
Mm-hmm. In your experience, when an organization or two people, whatever, I think whenever we're looking at change, we always, all of us have that wall that we slam into. And I'm curious when you're working with a group and they've kind of hit their walls, I suspect there's more than one of them, metaphorically speaking. How do you help people move past that? Like what have you found helps people move when, especially when they're feeling uncomfortable?
Learning to sit and be okay with the discomfort is one of the things I help them work through. And also learning to sit with it, being okay with it, and finding the common ground. I think that's what helps ground folks is to start from there. Okay, well, what do we both want? What is the outcome that we want? What are we looking to do? Even though we may have to compromise in how we go about it, but where do we start? Has been pretty successful.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing when to bring other people in, right? Sometimes um, when people hit that wall, they may need another day. And so recognizing that time and moving forward.
Oh, so true. So true. Um, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about change lately and how change in many ways is just a neutral force. Something was one way and now it's another way. And it doesn't necessarily say whether what is changing is helpful or positive, or like change kind of doesn't care about that, like the force of change. And so, yeah, how do we really craft our processes of change so that we can not just get a result by default,
Mm,
you know?
no, I think I would agree with you and add that change is the one constant, is the one constant. And so figuring out ways to be intentional with the change as it comes, and creating spaces so that we can grow with the change that is comfortable and the change that's not comfortable, and embracing it all, but being flexible and being able to move forward. And what I also know is that the way our system is, it's very slow changing. It takes time. It takes years. As I listen to legislators who are like, listen, you present a bill, you could expect it to fail, the first time, second time, and you just keep coming back, keep coming back. And so making space for that as well. Like, it's a process, and just knowing that, okay, I'm moving the needle maybe a little bit, and trust that within time we'll see an arc.
That's one thing that really intrigued me. I was listening to a previous interview you had done as I was preparing for this show, and two things stood out for me. One, I think you had mentioned, and I'd love if we would dig into this later, Vermont needing a vision about where to go, and providing that vision. But the other thing that stood out to me was, this is something about education, especially education of little people, that I think must be so hard for educators, is that you're preparing this young person for a world that doesn't exist yet. Right. And that idea of having a vision and yet not knowing where society's going to go, like not knowing there's going to be a pandemic, not knowing we're going to have more 100-year floods than we ever expected in one decade. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about that kind of tension between having a goalpost that you're aiming for and yet not knowing necessarily what society may need from year to year.
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance. It's a delicate balance. And I believe the way that can be achieved successfully is through coming together. Honestly, and allowing space for folks with different opinions and perspectives to come and try to create what we see for the future. As I think about, making the investment now so that later we can reap the benefits. When I think about our childcare, right? Investing in childcare now. If we do that now, it prepares children for kindergarten readiness. And we don't see, being okay with not seeing the results now, which is very different in our instant gratification mindset, where we have to see it now. If it doesn't make sense now, then it doesn't matter. And that's simply not true. That's simply not true. So is there an answer of how do you balance? Okay, we're preparing children for a world that we have no idea about, or how do we have a vision or a goal for a world we have no idea? We don't know what tomorrow brings, but what we can focus on are the things that are happening right now and being ready for what is to come. And how do we do that? We do that by working together, by making space for that.
Thank you. What is your vision of Vermont, right? When you think of the Vermont 20 years from now, what do you see, or what are you hoping for?
I'm really hoping for a Vermont where those who are living paycheck to paycheck can still live and thrive here and do well and provide for their family. And those who money is not a thing can also thrive here and do well. And where our schools do not have to worry about repairs, that we're thinking about the future. Like, we know we have a school we're going to need to repair, where our schools don't have that heavy burden, where people are able to pay their taxes or ask for assistance if need be, where teachers are feeling supported, where we won't have to recruit people to come and live in Vermont. People will come and know that young people will be able to, if they so choose, live, stay here, and be able to afford it.
Mhm.
And just a place where we can all thrive. And again, that's big picture, but it starts with all the little things, all the little things.
Mhm. What are some of the little things right now
Mhm.
um, that you see that are perhaps creating the struggle that many people, or contributing to the struggle that many people are feeling right now?
First thing that comes to mind, especially right now, is healthcare costs.
Hmm.
Uh, it's just not sustainable, and it's hitting everybody, from business owners to families, individuals, and I think about small businesses trying to figure out, okay, how do we pay for this?
Hmm.
Um, the other things I think about is like when I think about education and what we pay for when we pay our taxes, and asking the question, okay, what are we paying for? I understand that we're also paying for some private schools, and some may be outside of the country. So is that fair? Is that okay when our current public schools are struggling to pass their budgets and getting what they need, and teachers and administrators are scrambling? And just to name a few.
Hmm. I think what resonates for me is, as you're saying that, is especially with like school system. So much of what we do in our lives we've inherited from the people who came before us, positive and negative. And I don't know that we always stop to examine how those things came about.
Mhm.
And maybe there were some good reasons why those things came about, and there were some not so great. Like, it's probably a mix for a lot of these things. Um, and so it's that idea of unexamined stories. And I don't know, that's just kind of what you said is resonating with me. I don't know if that resonates with you at all,
It
or.
does. It does. As our systems they're not created to reflect and see, okay, is what we're doing now working, even though it may have worked 20 years ago.
Mhm.
There is no time or space to really question or ask. And so it's just going like it went, it's just going. We're going to keep going and going until, crisis, So, um, how do we be more proactive? And that's what I'm hoping to bring too. How do we be more proactive and not passive?
Mhm. Yeah, it's that kind of idea of default versus consciousness.
Yes, 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 yes,
Hmm.
yes.
We we have just under 5 minutes before the end of this first half. It always goes quickly.
I know.
Uh, and so for you, what just right now, based on some of the things we've talked about, what do you think is important for listeners to understand? Either about how you will approach government, systems change, just kind of what are you sitting with right now and what are you thinking about?
My deep understanding that it takes a village. No one person can do it on their own, and how critical it is that we work together and find a way, and not allow the blame game to be an excuse for us not moving forward.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the blame game a couple times. I'm wondering if you have any examples of just to make it a little more tactile for people to, because I think so often, and I'll just give this as context so you know where I'm coming from. Again, going back to that idea of unexamined stories, I think sometimes they're also unexamined because they're the water we swim in. And so we have no reason to like not see them, right? So yeah, I'd love if you could kind of dig into like maybe what's holding us back or the blame game, as you mentioned.
When I think about the blame game, learning that our current governor, when a veto happens and or things to, and there's a override, and instead of a conversation of, okay, how do we make it so that we can come to the table and we don't have to get to a veto session, but by the time we get there, we're on the same page, and how do we work together throughout the year? And is what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
And so my administration, we would be committed to working throughout the year, and when legislators are off, making sure that they come with a plan ready for them so that they have something to work off of.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Esther. I appreciate you saying that. And if you're kind of sitting there going, huh, I don't know where they're talking about, I'll try to find it. If I don't, we do have many conversations. Emily, John Walters, and I specifically have had about how the governor has used vetoes, rather than it appears to us, rather than coming to the table earlier in the session to work with the legislature, and then you're just kind of stuck with this veto at the end of the session instead. I'll try to find those episodes, but if I'm not, it is something that we have talked about on this show quite a bit. So thank you for sharing that, Esther. Any last thoughts before we hear from some underwriters?
This is great. Thank you so much again for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm really enjoying the conversation. So thank you for being here. So, hey, folks, stay tuned. Esther and I are going to take a break. We're going to hear from some underwriters on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. And we will be right back. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. If you're just joining us, I am the host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and I'm speaking with Esther Charlestin, who is the Democratic candidate for governor, and she'll be running in the election come November. And of course, we need to quickly thank Brattleboro Community Television for taking the video version of this show and sharing it with stations around Vermont. And since my lovely contributor, Emily Kornheiser, can't be here right now, it falls to me to say the views and opinions of everyone on the happy hour are those of the host and the guests, and no one else, not the platform, not their employers, not their coworkers, not their family members, their pets, or their houseplants, or anyone you could think of. So, Esther, thank you so much for being here. And again, congratulations on winning the primary.
Thank you.
I would love to talk about a little bit, as listeners have heard me say, I often feel that I'm a Vermonter by default because I grew up here and, family, all that stuff. But I know you moved from, I believe it was Rhode Island to Vermont just before the pandemic. And so you're kind of a Vermonter by choice. And I'm curious for you, what made you choose Vermont, and why do you keep choosing Vermont?
Oh, I love that question. I remember I had a job interview with Middlebury College, and I remember coming in for the interview and visiting and just seeing outside, standing outside, and thinking, wow, this is a beautiful community. And this is a place where I envision, where I can raise my children, and children can be children longer, is how I saw it in that short visit. And I said, yeah, this is home. And so my children and I moved here, and I got involved very quickly in my community and wanted to be plugged in because it was a dream to pick and choose a home for myself and my family. And so Vermont was that for me. I love the mountains, I have to say, and I love the open fields. I love that we don't have billboards. I just love that kids can play in the mud, and we're not worried about that. That's normal. My kids come home, especially during the, mud season, mud everywhere. I embrace that and love that. And the peace of mind, the sunsets, nature is my healing place, honestly. So being out in nature, and Vermont provides that, and it does.
Thank you. I always think it's interesting to, when I have left Vermont and I have lived in other communities, finding your place in a new community can be interesting, to say the least. And I'm
Absolutely.
curious, I sometimes feel that in Vermont, it's a place that once you're part of the community, like you're there
Mhm.
and you are a part of the community and like you kind of belong to each other. But sometimes I wonder what it's like to make home in Vermont as a new community member. Were there places that was easy? Were there places where that was hard? What was that like?
Well, I had a lot of coffee dates. I I love meeting people, and I love, if I connected with you at the grocery store, hey, you want to grab a coffee? And and so I joined a church community. I became the member of the Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society. And so that was a great way to really meet people in my community and learn about more and go to activities and go to coffee shops, do work there. And so once you're in, you're in. But getting in is definitely an uphill battle. But I was able to find my people, which is awesome. And then, once we connected, then it's like, oh, come over and you can meet so and so, and you can meet so and so, and then you learn, it's so that was how I got connected, and it was amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny when I have lived in like larger cities and have talked to new friends about, okay, we have to build community. And the blank look on the face,
Yeah.
like what? You're actually trying to meet
Oh, I get that. Yeah, yeah. It's not the same everywhere. And I think that's what I love about Vermont is the aspect of community is so important. And especially because we hibernate in the
people. Oh, we do.
winter. You're like, where is everybody? But when you find that community and just support each other and really be there, it's always a pleasure. But it is so different in other places where they don't look at community the same, especially in larger cities.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other reason I asked that too is, as a state, we are trying to shift some of our demographics and attract more people, especially young families and workers to the state. And I have in my other life with Vermont Business Magazine, I've interviewed a number of organizations that's what they do. They're working with the state. I think it's the Think Vermont website to create, I don't know, some of them call it like a concierge welcome service. Some people call it a welcome wagon. Um, but how do you actively like attract people to your community and then help them find their home
Yeah.
within that community? And sometimes it's been successful and sometimes it's not.
Mhm.
And that too is also why I'm always curious when someone chooses Vermont as a home, like what was easy about that and what was hard, you know?
Yeah. I would say for me, what was hard was kind of being away from my family, but
Mm,
having a good, it was, I had a great job at the college. at that time. And so it was worth it. And I was extrovert, really into like creating my community. So I was like, I'll figure it, I'll bring the people together. And but what was hard was not having family close by. But my family was really supportive of me traveling and making Vermont home.
Fantastic.
What also has been hard is finding my path to and not really finding my path. I am a Black woman. And so, in a predominantly white space. And so not everybody's okay with that.
Right.
And so really taking up space and but doing it in a way where it's like, no, I'm here and not alone. There's a whole bunch of us who want to be here and we love it here and we want to make it home. So there has been its challenges, and I refuse to believe that one defining moment is all of my experience here in Vermont. The good absolutely outweigh the hard.
Thank you, Esther. Yeah, I think that harkens a little bit to some of what you experienced in the Middlebury school system, that you came up against some overt and probably covert racism, and actually chose to step down from your position, which I can only imagine must have been heartbreaking because it sounded like a really interesting work that you were doing. But one thing I think you said in an op-ed that you wrote for the Addison Independent after stepping down from that job was you had said, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the fact that some of these incidents had happened, like one of the students had written the N-word in the school bathroom directed at you, which, I mean, I'm so sorry. But one of the things you had said in the op-ed was you weren't so upset that these incidents had happened, but that there weren't systems in place to support you and students when these things happen. And that really stood out to me. And again, coming back to that idea of system change.
Yes.
And the water we swim in. And I can only imagine the number of people you brought it up to, and they were like, what?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, if you don't mind talking more about that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is the systems, because those things do happen. In me choosing to live in Vermont, I do acknowledge that, hey, this will be a part of your experience, that, are you okay with it, and really figuring it out, but not having the systems in place to support folks was the issue for me. And in talking and in me bringing it up, I've learned that there was a lot of people who were going through the same thing, who felt like they were isolated. And system change, again, is moving the needle, is the way that we make lasting change, because the person can be great and the person can move on, who brings that energy. But when we make sure that it is system change, it lasts longer, and it will stay in a way that it doesn't matter who's there, the system will check them. And that's the hope. That's the hope.
Thank you for sharing that. It reminds me of a conversation I was actually having this morning with the folks behind Jenna's Promise up in Johnson. Are you familiar with Jenna's Promise?
I am. I actually facilitated a retreat there.
Oh, how cool. How cool.
I've been there. It's a beautiful space. Yes.
And I think it's a very interesting program. And the reason I'm bringing it up, and for those who aren't familiar with Jenna's Promise, it is a program that helps specifically women in recovery. uh, move from the beginning of their recovery into a place where they can lead self-directed, self-sustaining lives in a really amazing, positive way. And I think, one thing they're talking about is how do we change the system of recovery,
Yeah.
to support people. And the thing that I kept hearing that was so amazing was, they were talking about their services and their kind of their wraparound services, which is a buzzword we hear a lot.
Yes.
But what it really, how people can thrive when they have a system that catches them when they're struggling.
Oh, absolutely. And when that happens, we have to do less work um, if they fall through the cracks. It's
Mm.
easier to catch them while they're falling than allow folks to like crash and not know what to do or where to go next. And so I love hearing about the wraparound system. I truly believe in that. And it makes me think of even in education, right? If a child is hungry, they're not going to do math. I'm sorry.
Yep.
This is just not going to happen. If their tooth is hurting from a cavity, they're not going to read and do the assignment. So how do we support folks to make sure that they get the supports they need? And then they're able to show up better. And yeah, that to me is the work.
Mm. One thing I have noticed about systems is, and when a system is positive and strong, we don't necessarily have to ask this question. But I think quite often when we create a system, we as human beings, we assume it works. And so,
Yes.
one, we don't examine it. And two, if someone struggles in that system, we assume it's their fault
Yes.
and not that the system may be letting them down. As you think about what you experienced when you weren't supported
Mhm.
in the school system, but also going back to that, how are we creating the Vermont of 20 years from now? Are there questions we should be asking ourselves of our organizations, of ourselves, of the systems we have in place that maybe we don't?
Um, I think the question that comes to mind for me is this working? And does it work for the world we have now? So creating within the system, creating an avenue so that we can reflect on it
Mm.
and making sure that it is a part of the process would be so important. So is it working, and is it working for what we need today? And does it set us up for tomorrow? Again, that's a tricky question as we don't know what tomorrow brings. But to not ask that question would be a mistake.
Mhm. Yes. I also think sometimes when it comes to systems change, we put too much pressure on either one part of the system or one person to make the change and forget that it's a whole system. It's a spider web. It's not this one straight line, in my opinion.
I agree. I agree so strongly. I I currently facilitate at a specific school system that they've created. I'm trying to say this without giving too much away, but the importance of, so what you said that resonated with me was making sure that in the systems change, that it's not reliant on one person. And so if the person's not there, it all falls apart. And so making sure that, I love the analogy you used of a spider web, of making sure that there's a balance there and that we're able to hold. So when the fly comes, we don't all go down. We're still able to bounce back up and come up. So how do we do that? And how can we be intentional about that? Would be important to make a part of the system where we question it on a regular basis. And
Mhm.
so I believe that would be helpful in us. It gives us a chance to reflect. Is this working? Does this set us up for tomorrow? And is it helpful right now?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think those questions become even more profound when we bring it back to the fact that you're running for governor, and that if elected, you will be the main CEO, as Emily likes to say, of a pretty big, pretty old, long running system, which is our state government. And of course, it won't all be on the governor's shoulders, but you know, thinking of the legislature now, and you've got the administrative, the judicial, the legislative branches. How do you think that system can reflect on itself a little bit better?
Wow, because that's a great question. Would say getting folks to a place where they feel like that is a priority. But being the governor, I mean, you could really implement some things to and work together with folks to make that a reality. But to make helping folks to prioritize that self-reflection piece and make it a part of the process, I think it would begin. Well, the way I envision it is really asking a series of questions when we're going into a process or before a process and at the end of a process to reflect on how did it go? Did it work? Did it not work? And if it didn't work, why didn't it work? And even having that conversation as a team, as committees. And then for the governor, having advisors and an administration that really reflects the diversity within Vermont, because we have, you have people from different backgrounds and who will help create that system. But it would honestly buy-in.
Yes.
Like buy-in would be the biggest hurdle of people believing that we should reflect. Yeah, it would take some intention. Definitely.
Well, yes, and to be sympathetic to people who are working with big challenges, whether it's the legislature or a school system or someone just trying to balance their family budget.
Yes.
Reflection it can be hard because one, it's like, oh God, one more thing I have to do. And then it may also tell you things you don't want to know. So yeah, I think when you say buy-in's important, that's no small thing. And prioritizing um, that refinement and that reflection is no small thing either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
as I can imagine, when you say that to folks, they're like, we have too much to do.
There's this fire and that fire.
And we got to be putting stuff out. I don't know what you're talking about, reflection. So yes, yeah, buying would be important and making it a priority.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Esther. We're kind of coming up near the end. Two other questions for you. And the first one is, I've been thinking about elections in general recently and how often we focus on, especially in the media, who wins, who loses, sort of thing. And but they're also a place where democracy can reflect, on people's policies, on beliefs, on what we're hoping for the future. So for you, regardless of whether you win or lose in November, what do you see? What would be successful to you? If to run a successful campaign, what does that look like for you?
I already have. I, s- I'm
Well done.
experiencing success. Yeah, in that I am a grassroots organization. I am not, um, not organization, campaign. And being voted in as the Democratic nominee, 24,000 people voted for me, intentionally circled my name so I can be here with a low, voter turnout. And when I think of those things and making history as the first person of color in Vermont to be able to do that, creating a path. And so I see that we're moving the needle. We're moving the needle. And so I view that as successful. Me having the debates with our current governor and doing that well, I see that as successful. Me listening to stories and traveling the state and really giving an opportunity for me to hear and just listen to folks and really hear where they're coming from and get folks a chance to get to know me. And I view as successful. So I really, so for me, I mean, Vermont is making waves, whether realizing it or not. So I view it as successful already. And so whatever the outcome may be,
Wonderful.
I'm grateful. And
Thank
to be in the year of Kamala Harris, the year we would have never imagined, where we are right now. We didn't see this coming,
No.
no one saw it coming and the way it happened. So I leave room for all things, but yes, we have a long way to go and we're slowly moving forward. And so to build on that momentum for us to keep going is success to me.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I stayed up too late
Oh, I
last
love
night.
it. That's great. That's great.
I saw all the speeches.
Oh, that's wonderful.
um, we are just about out of time. What would you like to leave listeners with? What do you want them to know about you or whatever you're sitting with right now?
Yeah. I would love folks to know that I am a wife, a mother, a small business owner, and I am committed to a better Vermont. And so whatever we need to do to get there, we will. And I believe in our legislature, our legislators who are working hard, and I believe working with them is the way forward and not against them. And so moving forward together is how I see us growing beautifully.
Thank you, Esther. And if people want to reach out to you, learn more about you, how can they do that?
Yes, please visit my website at estherforvt.com. I'm on Facebook, social, Instagram, and feel free to email info@esthercharlestin.com.
Thank you very much. Well, Esther Charlestin, candidate for governor in Vermont. Thank you for spending some time with us here on the Happy Hour, and good luck in the campaign.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, well, folks, this is all the time we have today on the Happy Hour. Again, thank you, Esther, for being here. Thank you, all of you, for tuning in. And as always, the Montpelier Happy Hour is on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station, every Friday at 2 and rebroadcasted on Wednesday morning. You can also find us wherever you subscribe to your podcasts and on BCTV. So take care, everyone, and have a good weekend.